It's being able to go to the farm, buying raw milk. We're buying raw milk at a farmer's market. We're there to protect that access for them, and that's, real freedom of choice when you can buy these foods direct from a local producer. I mean, just the way we have been carrying out our mission is that we think everyone should have a fundamental right to obtain the food of their choice from the source of their choice.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions Podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Hilda Labrada-Gore. This is episode 36, and my guest today is Pete Kennedy. Pete is an attorney in Sarasota, Florida, and a board member of the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund. In today's episode, Pete explains the mission of the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund. Simply put, they are working to protect our food freedom, our access to nutrient-dense foods, and the ability to grow our own. He and the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund have legally represented farmers facing enforcement actions, and they have counseled on the right to farm, herd shares, buying club operations, and much more on the federal and state level. You'll learn from our discussion how our food freedom is at risk and what you can do about it. Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors before we dive in. Hear speakers like those featured on these podcasts at the Wise Traditions Conference in Montgomery, Alabama, November 11th to the 14th. Learn, eat well, and have fun. Go to wisetraditions.org for details. And listeners like you, your invaluable support is critical for keeping this podcast on the air. Thank you so much. And now on to the interview. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Pete.
Good to be on, Hilda.
Were you interested in food or where our food comes from before you got involved with the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund?
Here's my background. On my mother's side of the family are the lawyers. Just have uncles that are lawyers. Grandfather was a lawyer. And on my father's side of the family are those in the food business. I mean, my father had a frozen food business for about 20 years. I mean, just growing up, I'd hear all these stories from him about how the United States, inspectors from the United States Department of Agriculture were making things difficult for his business. And he was a small business, and just harassment from this USDA inspector just made life much tougher for him than it should have been. And my grandfather was also connected to the food business. He worked for this corn products roundtable many years ago, which was designed to figure out just to expand business for the corn industry. And with some of the products out there, they're more successful, I guess, than we wish they had been. But that, there wasn't any research out on some of the harm that, and it was much later that products like high fructose corn syrup came on the market. But so I, just had the pedigree for it.
Well, I'm thinking now of the average consumer who may just not have anything to do with food in their home life except that they like to eat it. Why should they care? Why should the average consumer care about the work of the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund?
Because we're there to protect their freedom of choice. And freedom of choice really isn't Coke, Pepsi, McDonald's, Burger King. It's being able to go to the farm, buying raw milk. We're buying raw milk at a farmer's market, on-farm processed poultry. We're there to protect that access for them. And that's, real freedom of choice when you can buy these foods direct from a local producer. I mean, just the way we have been carrying out our mission is that we think everyone should have a fundamental right to obtain the food of their choice from the source of their choice, whether or not that source is regulated by a government agency. And so it might be something for people who aren't familiar with all these raids, think that they just take for granted they can obtain whatever foods they want. And that's not so, but we're there to try and work to make it so.
Food freedom is what we're talking about here, Pete. It just seems like, why would farmers need defenders, why would they need lawyers when they're just trying to provide food to people? Please help explain to those of us who are, kind of flabbergasted at this state of affairs.
Well, it really has to do with competition, I think, more than anything. I mean, there are really two food systems out there. There's the industrial food system and then the local food system. And raw milk is really at the center of the competition between the two systems. I mean, best way to explain that is that when you go to people go to a supermarket, often raw milk is what gets them there in the first place. It's a perishable item. It gets them going there as often as they do. Once they're there, they'll buy other products at the market. And from what we've seen, the same principle holds true at the farm. More than any other food, at least among our members, I think raw milk is what gets the consumer onto the farm in the first place. Once they're there, they'll buy meat, poultry, eggs, produce, but raw milk is what got them there to begin with. And there's also, unfortunately, there's still several states that ban the sale of raw milk. I mean, the good news is, by my count, I think there are 42 states that allow its sale or distribution in one form or another right now. But the interesting thing, Hilda, is I think another reason for this, and our raw milk expert, Dr. Ted Beals, has said this, is that a lot of these health departments, they're just raised on the germ theory where the only good bacteria is dead bacteria. And raw milk is just a live food, tons of beneficial bacteria in there. And I've just seen a couple instances with these health departments where raw milk has been made legal and the health department would rather not regulate it at all, just because it's tough for them to grasp the fact that it would be legal, that a food like that is legal. So between the competition that the conventional dairy industry would like to stop, and just this belief system that the public health officials have, what you have with raw milk is just a number of what are really economic protectionist regulations disguised as health regulations that make it difficult for raw milk farmers to sell as much as they're capable of or to sell at all.
I see, because in other words, there may be people in the government or people in some of these regulatory commissions who genuinely believe that raw milk is dangerous. And there may be others who simply want to squash the competition. Is that what I hear you saying?
Well, yeah, the people from industry want to squash the competition. In my opinion, if you're a small farmer today, it's very difficult to survive in the conventional dairy industry. I mean, I think it was something like, less than 50 years ago, there were 600,000 dairies in the country. Today, I'm pretty sure they're under 50,000. So, wow. Yeah, just a lot of these small conventional dairies have gone by the wayside. And when you're selling in the commodity system like they are, I mean, you might get the equivalent around $2 a gallon. Sometimes it's maybe $1.25 or $1.50 a gallon, where you could sell the same product direct to the consumer for several times that. I mean, even the states where the raw milk prices aren't as high for producers selling direct to consumers, it's still $5 or $6 a gallon. Then you take a state like California, it could be anywhere from $50 to $20 a gallon. So these, it's a way the small dairy farmer can stay in business, because the way the conventional system is going is they're just chewing up the small dairy farmers and spitting them out.
And that's why I think the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund has been a catalyst for even the fact that there are 42 states where the sale of raw milk is legal, because that was not the case 10 years ago, right?
No, it was less than that, and it's a combination. There's some states now where it used to be illegal, where it is now legal. There's a major win for raw milk consumers in West Virginia this year, because West Virginia previously had probably the strictest raw milk laws on the books of any state in the country. You couldn't sell it for human consumption. You couldn't sell it for pet consumption. There's a business model where raw milk is distributed to consumers, just called herd share agreements, and even that was banned. So it banned all three. And plus the fact it's right near, I think FDA considers it to be in its backyard. It's right near Washington. And FDA testified against a bill before the legislature this year, and it still passed. So it was just a great win for the people of West Virginia. There was a lady, Tania Creamer, up there who did a terrific job getting the bill through. So you've got states like West Virginia where it used to be illegal, now it's legal, and actually another state was this year, or within the past year, and it's only legal for pet consumption there now, but that's still a start. And I think, as you know, Sally Fallon was largely responsible for that happening. So, and that is definitely in FDA's backyard. They have 3 major offices in the state of Maryland.
Wow.
Yeah, on the one hand, you have these states where it wasn't legal at all, now it's legal. On the other hand, you also have other states that have expanded access to the product as time has gone along. So definitely it's still more work to be done, but there is definitely more access to raw milk today than there was 10 years ago, and demand continues to go up for it.
That must be so satisfying.
Well, I think our organization had a part in it. It just a lot of different factors came into it. What I've said is, you have a bad law when otherwise law-abiding citizens violate that law with regularity, and that's what you have with these laws prohibiting the sale of raw milk in the different states. And it's definitely a factor at the federal level. I mean, there are thousands of people in this country each week who get raw milk produced across state lines. And they just believe they have the right to the food of their choice from the source of their choice, and they're not going to let FDA dictate their food choices to them.
And you said this is a very unique situation in that it's as if raw milk is singled out for some of these interstate bans. Is there no other food product that has these same kind of regulations?
I don't know of any other product that ends in interstate commerce. And actually, Hilda, it's not just raw milk, it's all other dairy products, except for raw cheese that's aged at least 60 days. And just to give you an update on, some of our recent activity, yesterday the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund and Mark McAfee, the president of Organic Pastures Dairy Company in California, filed a petition with FDA to lift the interstate ban on raw butter. And the interesting thing is, FDA about 30 years ago issued mainly one regulation banning all dairy products other than aged raw cheese in interstate commerce. They required all the other products need to be pasteurized. And the interesting thing is, we think in issuing this regulation in regards to butter, FDA violated the law.
Really?
Because there's a law Congress passed about, over 80 years ago now, just defining butter. And in their definition of butter, there is no pasteurization requirement. And shortly after that, they passed that definition. They passed another law just called the Standard of Identity Regulation. And what that means is certain characteristics a food has to have when it's in interstate commerce. Like, for instance, the Standard of Identity for milk at this time requires it to be pasteurized. It has to have at least 3.25% milk fat, and I think like 8.5% what they call protein, not solids. So, yeah, you have these specific characteristics a food has to have, and Congress did not specifically set their own definition for butter. With most foods, FDA sets the standard of identity through regulation, but not all, and butter was one of the ones they did not. So basically, FDA went ahead and issued their own standard of identity for butter, even though the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act specifically says FDA cannot do that. So you've got a case where FDA has violated the law, and are they going to admit it, or is this going to have to go to court? I mean, we'll see how they react to the petition. It might not be for a while, 6 months to a year minimum before they react, but it'll be interesting to see what their response is.
That will be. Now tell me, Pete, what is your role in the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund?
Okay, well, for a little over 7 years, I served as president. I stepped down earlier this year, but I mainly work on member services. Say someone wants to set up a herd share agreement, I'll work with them on that. We'll work with some of the food buyers clubs if they want documents, if anyone needs an interpretation, looking for help in interpreting the laws on, say, meat and poultry processing or just raw milk distribution. I help out with that as well. I've also worked the past couple years on with legislators and members on legislation in a number of states. This past year, worked with some people in Indiana that were able to get a non-farm poultry processing law passed, which I think if it doesn't break new ground, I mean, Indiana is still one of the few states where under this new law, someone processing poultry on the farm can sell to schools. Because right now, when you're talking about mostly farm-to-school programs, they're produce. And this is something where they will now be allowed, in Indiana, producers there will now be allowed to sell poultry into the school system, which I think is a huge step forward, and like to see other states replicate the same thing.
This is groundbreaking because I have read some of Joel Salatin's books, and he talks about how hard it is for the little guy, I mean the regular farmer, to break into the monopoly that some of these big food companies, who shall remain nameless at this moment in time, but that some of these big food companies have a hold on. In other words, some of these food companies, back up their big trucks to a Walmart or to a Costco or a grocery store, and they deliver all their foods while in the meantime there's a farmer just down the road that's growing amazing produce and raising amazing grass-fed pastured animals that they can't sell because of the regulations that bar them from participating in providing food to a local school or grocery store. That's what you're talking about, right?
Right, yeah, there's just so many hoops. I mean, restaurants is another big thing. In Indiana, until this law passed, I mean, there was only, the poultry industry was trying to pass their own law barring any sales of on-farm processed poultry to restaurants. When, this is not a food safety issue, Hilda. I mean, this is one of these issues where you really see that this is just about competition.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked with farmers processing poultry on the farm in a number of states. I mean, there's a federal exemption which allows them to do it without an inspector being present when they're slaughtering the birds. And I can tell you, I've never heard any producer under this exemption being legitimately accused of making people sick. And yet the poultry industry, in trying to pass this bill in Indiana, was saying, well, it's, there's no inspector present, it could be risky, we have to protect the public health, and we can't have sales to restaurants. When you look at the biggest health problems with poultry processing are the big slaughterhouses. Just going through, working on this bill, I found something where there's this one slaughterhouse, I don't know if it's still in existence, but was in the past years, the slaughterhouse was processing over 400,000 birds a day.
400,000 a day. Wow, that's staggering.
The people under this federal exemption processing poultry on the farm can't process more than 20,000 in a year. So where do you think the quality control problems are going to be?
Absolutely. And the farmers are good at what they do, but I can understand where all this legal mumbo-jumbo and these hoops they have to jump through can get very onerous and confusing.
Yeah, here's the thing. You can have the best soil, the healthiest animals, the best marketing plan, but if you don't have a favorable regulatory climate and favorable laws enabling you to run a successful farm, the rest of it doesn't matter. And that's what we're there for. We work in the courts, work in the legislatures, at the administrative level, and, are active in what I call the court of public opinion, just whether it's printing stories on our website and just trying to advocate for as favorable a regulatory climate for our members as we can get. And there's just a lot of demand out there for locally produced food, as you know. but farmers need to have the legal and framework in place to give them a chance to succeed.
So, Pete, your work sounds really important. What was the seed that kind of got the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund started?
Well, the individual more responsible for the start of the Legal Defense Fund than anyone is Sally Powell. She was convinced that there was a need just with these increasing enforcement actions against farmers. And without her, it either wouldn't have gotten started at all or just started much later than it actually did start up.
One person can make a difference. That's fantastic. We want to pause now and thank our sponsors. The Weston A. Price Foundation. You can hear speakers like those featured on this show in person at the Wise Traditions Conference in Montgomery, Alabama this November. You will have opportunities to delve deeper, ask questions, and connect with people who care about nourishing their health through nutrient-dense foods just like you. There will be 44 expert speakers, 5 delicious meals, 85 great exhibitors, and over 1,000 attendees. I will be among them. I'm looking forward to it. Join us. We will learn, eat well, and have fun. Go to wisetraditions.org for details. And listeners like you. On iTunes, Sem115 gave us this review. This is an excellent podcast. It never fails to inform, enlighten, and entertain. I always learn something new when I listen to this show. Thanks, Weston A. Price Foundation, for making these available. You're welcome. It's our pleasure. Thanks for the review, Sem115. You talked about putting stories on your website. Can you tell us a story, Pete? When you talk about, for example, enforcement action, nothing exactly comes to mind. So help the listener understand what is an enforcement action that would take place against, for example, a small dairy.
Well, I'll give you an example. I mean, our signature victory was a few years ago in this case in Wisconsin. A farmer named Vernon Hirschberger had a private buyers club who leased his cows. He provided them dairy products, also provided other products in his farm. And this was a private arrangement. Vernon didn't sell to the general public, only to the members of this buyers club. And just over time, the state of Wisconsin would send him warning letters. You know, he'd keep on with his business. But then in 2010, they raided his farm several times. And the first time, the first of the 3 raids, when they went in, they taped his refrigerators, his freezers, and a on-farm store he had. The tape was taken off. Vernon believed they didn't have jurisdiction over this private arrangement he had, and they wound up, as a result of that, and just the fact that he was continuing to sell, the state of Wisconsin wound up bringing 4 criminal charges against him. There was a 5-day trial. There was an endless number of hearings before then, maybe as many as 10 pre-trial hearings. I don't have the exact number.
What were they accusing him of?
First, for violating this order, preventing people from going into the refrigerators and freezers that had been taped. Then there was selling, having this on-farm store without what's called a retail establishment permit. There was selling milk without having a milk producer license. But the catch-22 there is, if you have a milk producer license, except for very minor exceptions, you can only sell milk that's produced for pasteurization. And then they had another charge was for not having a milk plant license, which had to do with the dairy products. Again, there's a catch-22. Like I said, other than raw cheese, if you have a milk plant product license, you can't sell any raw dairy products. You can't sell raw cream or butter. So, we estimate that the state of Wisconsin probably spent over $500,000 just prosecuting Vernon. He was acquitted on 3 of the 4 counts. The one with the hold order where he took off the tape, he was convicted on that, but he was convicted on all the other 3 counts.
Or acquitted.
Yeah, on the other 3 counts, which enabled him to continue on with what he was doing. And I estimate, whereas the state of Wisconsin spent over $500,000, we probably spent between $60,000 and $65,000 on defending Vernon and being successful. And yeah, there's our then vice president, who's now our president, Elizabeth Rich, was co-counsel, and she's been a long-time board member of ours as well. And then we had a local attorney who was willing to work for a greatly reduced fee to represent Vernon, and it basically only cost Vernon his annual membership fee, which was $125. I mean, that's the best example I can give of how we just level the playing field. We're able to get the farmer inexpensive representation. Most of the time when we do represent a farmer, they're only in court, their only cost is their membership fee. We're there to prevent the government from bullying a farmer and just dragging him through any number of judicial and administrative hearings. I'll give you an end to the story. The jury that acquitted Vernon on 3 of the 4 counts, I think at least 3 members of the jury wound up joining Vernon's Food Buyers Club.
Oh my gosh.
I think to this day there's at least one of them who's still a member.
That is awesome. That is so awesome. And I know we only have so much time on the podcast, but I do have to ask you, what was motivating the state of Wisconsin to spend so much money in prosecuting this farmer? Was it the competition squashing thing you were talking about? I don't get it.
Well, yeah, that's part of it. As you know, I think that Wisconsin has more conventional dairy farms by far than any other state in the country. So they have a powerful dairy industry. And the other thing was Vernon stood up to them, and they didn't like that. So they don't, they're used to dictating to people. When someone asserts their rights like Vernon did, they didn't like that. So whereas in most, I think a lot of situations like this, the state would have gone after civil charges. I think they were, offended enough with Vernon standing up to them that they went for criminal charges instead.
Wow, and let's be honest. I know, Pete, you're trying to be kind of humble and modest in your assessment of the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund, but Vernon could not have stood up to the state of Wisconsin if he did not have your backing, because farmers don't have the resources to defend themselves to the tune of, thousands of dollars, really.
Yeah, it's, what we can do for them is if there's some kind of enforcement action or a court case, they won't have to spend their money on attorneys. They can keep spending the money on their farming operation. It's a difficult situation for them. It's when there are these types of actions, usually their business is not going to be as good as it was prior to the action, but the one thing we can do is just make sure they can concentrate whatever money they do have on the farming and not have to spend it on lawyers.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Pete, I want to go back a little bit. Why was the Weston A. Price Foundation concerned with soy production or wanting to have some legal representation in that realm?
Sally Fallon always believed that there are major health problems with conventionally produced soy. And, yeah, she wasn't afraid to take on one of the giants in Cargill. As far as I know, unfortunately, the petition he was going to file to take the soy product on the market, I don't think it wound up going anywhere. But Weston Price has always been committed to just telling the truth about soy, because there's a lot of industry propaganda, I think, for any number of reasons. The conventional industry makes a lot of money off of soy while just harming the public's health at the same time. One of the other actions Weston Price took was to pay for litigation filed by some prisoners in Illinois. The meals at the prison meat was being replaced with soy. There was a heavy soy diet at the prison, and there were all kinds of health problems. We didn't even handle that case, but we used to get calls back when the case was going on from a number of either former prisoners or family of prisoners just describing all the health problems those prisoners were having, and they believed it was because of the soy diet.
Wow, that sounds really important. I'm so glad you're doing it. So as we wrap up, Pete, I usually ask my guests, what is one thing you would recommend that the listener do to improve their health?
Well, we'll put in a plug. The thing they can do to improve their health is join the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund, because we protect their right to nutrient-dense foods. So if they go on our website, held at www.farmtoconsumer.org, they can read all about our work. There's an application form they can get online to get them to join up, and there's strength in numbers. The more people we have as members, I think the more effective we'll be.
And you don't have to be a farmer to be a member, is that right?
We have several different memberships. There's a farmer membership, a consumer membership. If you're an artisan producer, like, say, a local bread maker, you can join up. We have affiliate memberships for food buyers clubs. We have a number of food buyers clubs that are members. And just the past year or so, we started a homesteader member where homesteaders get a lower membership fee than the farmers. If their sales are below a certain amount of money, they are eligible for the homesteader category. And that's actually, we're getting a number of these cases now with homesteaders who are just trying to have a backyard flock or something like that, produce a little bit more of their own food, and they're running into problems with zoning. So protecting your right to grow your own food is becoming something we're increasingly more involved with.
Well, thank you so much for the important work you're doing, Pete, and thank you so much for taking time for this interview today.
Well, thanks for having me on, Hilda.
This was episode 36, and my guest was Pete Kennedy. To learn more about the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund, just go to their website, farmtoconsumer.org. There you'll find more stories that will inform you about their critical work, and you'll find information on how to become a member or just donate to their important cause. For more resources, go to show notes on episode 36 on the westonaprice.org website.
Did you know that there are Weston A. Price Foundation chapters all over the U.S. and around the world? Chapter leaders help you find good food in your area, and some have meetings you can attend. Go to our website, westonaprice.org, and click on Find a Local Chapter to see if there is one near you. Wise Traditions is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for medical advice.